I think that many of us are probably feeling overwhelmed by how many moments of silence this year has called for. But here we are. Let us pause in silence to honor the life of Renee Nicole Good and to sit with the grief and anger that arise when violence is normalized and sanctioned and glorified. May we rise from this silence with courage for whatever may come next. Before I begin, I want to offer some words of context. This talk that I'm giving this morning was written more than a few months ago, before the recent murder of Renee Nicole Good. I want to name her death with care and to name the anger and moral complexity many of us are holding right now. I want to be really clear about something. Protest and resistance are not wrong. They have always been essential tools for justice and for survival. The freedoms we have exist because people were willing to resist openly and at great cost. What I'm going to wrestle with here this morning is not whether we should resist, but how we discern what kind of resistance is faithful, transformative, and life-honoring. It's a reflection on the difference between making a bunch of noise and making real change, and on the spiritual discipline required to know the difference. Also, there will be strong language and a racial slur and references to physical violence. I do not do this lightly. I do it for historical context and also to bear witness to truth. I've been thinking about what it means to stand for something in a time when standing itself costs so little. The images of protest that fill my Facebook feed are meant to signify conviction, but so often they feel like performance, like gestures toward bravery that stop just shy of it. And I don't mean that with cynicism. I think most people are doing what they can with the best intentions. It's just that I feel our culture has learned to reward expression more than transformation. I come from a different story. Patriarchs from my family were at the Battle of Hayes Pond in Robeson County, North Carolina. A moment of real danger, real defiance, where people risked their lives in the face of hatred. That's the example I grew up with. Courage is action, not image. Conviction is something that drew blood, not Facebook likes. And in the Jim Crow South, where the Lumbee people lived under the weight of segregation and denial of basic rights, that night was more than defiance. It was a declaration. And if you aren't familiar with that story, and I'm willing to bet most, if not all of you are not, it was January 18th, 1958. It was also referred to as the night the Klan ran, in headlines across the South the next day. The Ku Klux Klan had been holding rallies across the region, marching, burning crosses, driving throughout communities in their trucks outfitted with loudspeakers, reminding people of their place. And in Robeson County, a swampy, backwater, isolated place where Lumbee people, my people, had lived and endured for generations, the Klan decided to make a show of power. And the Lumbees decided to make a show of their own as well. The Lumbees gathered about 500 men and 50 women, and when night fell, they surrounded the KKK rally, the whole mass of them crying out, "God damn the KKK!" as they drew in. The Klansmen screaming in return, "Half niggers!" And a single Lumbee man called out, "You ain't gonna mess with these people tonight, and don't you move, because if you do, I'm gonna kill you." And the one light bulb illuminating the field was then shot out, causing everything to be blanketed in pitch darkness. My grandfather was there among them, and so was my 17-year-old father. It was a battle. No one called it a protest. No one held signs or took selfies. There was no social media. It wasn't about being seen. It was about saying in body and in spirit, "You cannot come here and frighten us. Not anymore." There was risk, real risk. These were people who knew what violence could look like, and yet they stood their ground. They did it not for applause, not for recognition, but because dignity required it. Because silence had a cost. And this physical pushback was the only language left to speak. That night at Hayes Pond would go on to mark a turning point, a rare moment when the Klan was driven out by the very people it tried to terrorize. Catfish Cole, the Klansman in charge, ended up hiding in a swamp for the rest of the night. The Lumbees seized the KKK's cross. Then they marched through the streets and celebrated by hanging and burning an effigy of Cole. The KKK never held another rally in Robeson County. That story lives in me. It is in my bones. I cannot tell you how many times I heard this story growing up. It shaped my sense of justice. That justice is not an idea to admire, but a demand to answer. And maybe that's why today's surface level resistance feels hollow to me. I don't crave spectacle, I crave substance. The kind of courage that doesn't need to announce itself because it already knows the cost. But that also makes me wrestle with my all or nothing impulse. I sometimes believe that if I'm not risking everything, then I'm not risking anything. And yet, it seems now that life doesn't always demand the same kind of visible heroism. The world's wounds have been shifting just a bit. The world I live in now is different. And when I look around, protest often takes another shape, the shape of online slogans and hashtags, statements made for a news feed. No kings. Defend democracy. And it's not that these gestures are wrong. They absolutely have their place. They can inspire. They can connect. They can call attention. But so often they feel inadequate somehow. Like we've learned how to look courageous, without learning how to live courageously. Like performing conscience, mistaking a moment of fervor and outrage for the spark of true revolution. And I don't say this to dismiss what people are trying so hard to do. I say it because I know how hungry we all are to do the things that matter. We're exhausted. We're angry. We're afraid. How do we face down our own comfort? The ways in which we safely stay behind our words instead of risking real change. And I say we because I'm not separate from that. I know the ease of it, the gratification of doing something visible without letting it cost me anything real. And that's what troubles me. Because when courage becomes a performance, the world does not change. Only our self-image does. And when I feel that, I think of my father. I think of that January night. The fear, the cold, the darkness, the loaded guns. And I ask myself, what would courage look like now? For me, for us, in this time and place, in Quincy, Illinois. And I've come to believe that it might look different, but it's no less demanding. Maybe courage now means staying with the work when it's slow, staying in the conversation when it's very uncomfortable, staying faithful to a cause long after the crowd has moved on. Maybe courage looks like sacrifice that doesn't photograph well, the steady giving of time, of money, of care, the giving of self. Maybe it's listening when I'd rather argue, softening when I'd rather cut someone off and retreat. Maybe it's refusing cynicism, choosing again and again to believe that love can still change things, even when it's deemed foolish and short-sighted to think so. Maybe courage now isn't always about confrontation, but about continuity. Not the raging fire of one night, but the slow, steady flame that refuses to go out. The courage of my father and the Lumbee people that night was to push back with their shotguns and cry, "No more." The courage we are called to might be to say, "Still, I will work. Still, I will love. Still, I will hope." Because every generation has to find its own form of courage, but the purpose is always the same: to defend our shared humanity, to resist the pull of fear and indifference. Because when I think of the kind of church I want to belong to, the kind of world I want to help build, the kind of world I want to leave for my children, I think of that kind of courage that costs something, but also heals something. Not loud necessarily, but lasting. Not performative, but practiced. The kind that you can hand down, as my father handed his to me, not necessarily as a story of glory, but as a way of being alive. So maybe our work, you and me and this community, could be to live courage quietly, faithfully, again and again, to let it shape how we speak to and about others, how we spend, how we listen, how we love. Because there are still powers that depend on our performances. There are still systems that thrive on our exhaustion. And there are still neighbors, our neighbors, who need someone to stand beside them, even when we're unsure and tired and afraid. Maybe it isn't about grand gestures or explosive action, but about sustained presence, discipline, using our hearts like tuning forks so we don't mistake noise for depth. So we always look at things through a lens of integrity. The shape of the struggle may change, but the soul of it never does. Courage is still the work of love refusing to back down. And it always has been. And so I carry my daddy with me, not as a weight, but as a compass. I honor the kind of courage he lived that night and many other times, that visible, urgent bravery. But my task might be of a different shape, to find courage that breathes in subtler air, to make meaning not by spectacle, but by steadfastness, to practice the long obedience of care, conviction, and community in a world that has forgotten what those words cost. We must be steady. We must be willing to let our living cost us something.